Hello and welcome to the Monday show via the Everything is Black and White podcast. I'm Andrew Musgrove, joined by Aaron Stokes. Thank you very much for tuning in, and a huge thanks as well to Sealy, our new sponsors on the podcast. They are the company that will provide you a new eSIM via their app, brought to you by the creators of NordVPN. You can choose from several affordable eSIM data plans in over 200 destinations with the Sealy eSIM. You'll always have connection when needed. Why Sealy? Well, if you've ever been lost abroad or badly needed an internet connection with no Wi-Fi spot in sight, you'll understand what a difference a local SIM card can make. And an eSIM provides an internet connection wherever you are, wherever you travel, and saves you money on roaming fees. And Sealy provide that. So hit the link in the podcast description box if you want a discount offer on your eSIM provided by Sealy in time for your summer holidays. Welcome everybody in the live chat on YouTube. And already I've titled this "Why the Hate on Anthony Elanga," because I think he'd be great. We've already got quite a few people saying he's not that good. But before we get on to that, Aaron, you doing well? Had a good weekend?
Yeah, good weekend. Feels like the transfer window's just heating up, doesn't it? And then all of a sudden, it's going to close again for a week tomorrow, which is a slightly unusual thing to have to deal with
Slams
this
shut,
summer.
doesn't it?
Yeah,
For the
quick
Club
shut, I think,
World Cup.
tomorrow, yeah.
But as it is Newcastle United, nothing has happened yet to get our excitement going. But I have titled this podcast, as I said, they're all about Anthony Elanga. And we will talk about him in a brief moment. There is quite a lot to talk about, despite the lack of signings. We did have, as we said there, a little bit of movement over the weekend when it comes to inquiries. But looking at the overall picture, there are some frustrations behind the scenes regarding the so-called Newcastle United tax that is landing at Newcastle's door. What do you make of it? And I guess without a real solution, what can Newcastle actually do about it?
Yeah, it's been called the sort of Saudi tax. I think you can also probably discuss another thing as well, and that's sort of the Premier League tax and the fees that are going to be bounced around for players playing in England. I think, to speak to a wider point, I think it's actually would be beneficial this summer if they did go abroad. But, as you've said, by the looks of it at the minute, they're making inquiries for players that are very much Premier League experienced. Anthony Elanga, Joao Pedro of Brighton. So, yeah, look, I suspect there will be some negativity behind the scenes, but hopefully no negativity here, because we're 9 days in. And again, like we said last week, there's no need to panic. Plenty of time to get deals done.
Patience is still the key word. You said there the tax mainly applies to that kind of domestic buy, the Elangas, the Pedros. So ideally, you would want to target abroad, bring in players that represent better value for money. But do you think that's something that Eddie Howe wants to do? Is that something Eddie Howe would be happy with? I know we've seen Botman and we've seen Bruno and Isak to a certain degree, although that was quite a bit of money. Various reports that Eddie Howe wants to target these Premier League established players. Would going abroad disrupt his plans, do you think?
No, look, I think Eddie Howe will be keeping an open mind. Yes, obviously we know that he does like to sign Premier League players. We saw that with the likes of Anthony Gordon and Harvey Barnes. But as you've mentioned there, rightly so, there's been plenty of examples where Newcastle United have gone a little bit further afield and found some real gems for probably 15, 20 million pound less than you would have got if you bought them from a Premier League team. Again, as I said a couple of minutes ago, I would really sort of not be worried by Newcastle going abroad. As I say, it doesn't look like at this stage of the window they are sort of doing that. But if it was to come out in the next couple of weeks that they are, looking at players in Serie A, La Liga, then I would be absolutely on board with that. Because I do generally think you look around the Premier League and I think the prices are getting so inflated. And look, we're going to go on and talk about Elanga, who I think is a fantastic player. Joao Pedro, another very, very good option for Newcastle. But I just look around some of those leagues. I mean, Serie A, and the players you can get for half the price, three-quarters of the price. And I just think, is that the route Newcastle should be going down? As for what Eddie Howe will do, I think, as we say, he does have his preference for Premier League players. But we've seen before that he's not been afraid to go abroad.
On to Anthony Elanga then, a man we know Newcastle have liked for a long time and are back in for this summer. A pacey, tricky winger, capable playing on both sides, 23, so the right age, has impressed Newcastle enough for them to come back in form. We know Brian and Burmo, if the numbers had worked out, was potentially ahead of him in the pecking order. What do you make of the news that Anthony Elanga is back at the top of the list now and Newcastle United are pursuing his signature.
Well, I'm not really surprised, to be fair, that Newcastle United are back in. I think this has been a pattern of Newcastle United and Eddie Howe and sort of the recruitment team at Newcastle. They know what they like and they like what they know, and that is players like Anthony Elanga, who they tried to sign last summer on deadline day. Someone like Joao Pedro, who they tried to sign 2-3 years ago when he was at Watford. Someone like Marc Guehi, who we all know they were very, very keen on last summer. And James Trafford, who, again, we know that they had interest in and they were quite close to signing last summer. So those have been sort of the four big names that Newcastle United have been linked with and quiet about, as we've been here in the last couple of days. And I think, again, that is just the clearest indication of Newcastle United sticking to their guns. We saw them do it with Sven Botman when they didn't get him in the January before they signed him. We've seen them do it with other transfers, including Anthony Gordon. Doesn't surprise me at all that they're backing for Elanga. But again, as the sort of title of this episode alludes to, I think, had we been sitting here talking about it being Brian Mbeumo as the right wing option, I think it would be 99% positive. Whereas I think Anthony Elanga from the outside might take a little bit longer to sort of get the full fan base on board.
Don't worry, we will read through some of the tweets that have been sent my way about Elanga, and of course the comments in the live chat. Now, sources I've spoken to say that Forest believe they're in a strong position with Elanga, and any hope that Newcastle can run down the price towards maybe 30, 35, 40 million is unrealistic. They're in no PSR danger. It's been described to me, Aaron, as Newcastle's situation with Isak, just without the Champions League football. So essentially a key part of the team under contract for the next 3 years. And unless that player pushes to move, then any buying club are going to have to pay what is demanded of them. And that is, at least to me, what's been said, at least £60 million, which is a huge amount of money. But the way I look at it is, what could he be worth in 2 to 3, 4 years if he continues to develop? £60 million, really, Aaron, could prove to be a bargain.
It could, yeah, but it's a tricky one because there is potential there. He's 23 years old. He is a product of the Manchester United Academy. I was very, very surprised they even sold him back then. He's clearly flourished down at the City Ground with Forest. Ticks lots of boxes. He's the right age profile. He's in the right position. He's pacey. He knows how to play with Alexander Isak. So many things tick that box. But I just look at it and think, it is an almighty risk to make Anthony Elanga your second most expensive transfer ever. And when we're talking about players like Brian Mbeumo going for potentially, 2.5 million more based off the seasons that they've just had, I think there'd only be one answer as to who Newcastle United fans would go for.
But the wages could be absolutely crucial here. I get what you're saying about the price tag. And yes, if I was able to clip my fingers and have one player in a black and white shirt, it would be Brian Mbeumo because of the season he's had. But that's just not going to happen. It's unrealistic because of the demands Brian Mbeumo is putting on the table. And £250,000 a week is crazy numbers. Now, Elanga is reportedly on, well, some reports say he's on as little as 25 grand a week. Others put it as high as 48 grand. But regardless, somewhere in between, let's say, there is scope there for Newcastle United to really tempt them with a big, big pay rise. You've also got Champions League football on offer. You've got the prospect of linking up with Alexander Isak, his fellow Swede, an unwritten guarantee, because Eddie Howe's never going to say to him, you are definitely first choice on the right wing, but we all know whoever comes in this position is pretty much first choice. And then his wage. I mean, there's a lot on offer for Elanga to like here, but the wages, I think, could be absolutely key here.
Yeah, they could. And I think, obviously, we knew last week, and it was obviously came out when Manchester United looked like they'd won the race with Brian Mbeumo, that there was obviously huge extortionate wage demands from the player side, more than quadruple what he's on at Brentford, and Newcastle obviously didn't want to go that high anyway. So yeah, look, wages could be really crucial, and I think it's an interesting case with Elanga because, as you pointed out on social media last weekend, we've seen Newcastle United fans saying, okay, we should be paying no more than 35 million for Elanga. Then you've got some fans saying he's not worth more than 40. Then you've probably got more realistically what Forest are going to want from him, and that is 50, 60 million. But then I sort of looked at the other end of the spectrum, and you see Nottingham Forest fans on social media going, well, if Newcastle aren't going to offer 70 or 80 million for Anthony Elanga, then we shouldn't even be picking up the phone. So it's interesting that you've got this player who, depending who you ask, is either £50 million more expensive than how somebody else views him. And I think, again, that probably goes to the point of why people are unsure whether Elanga is the man Newcastle should be targeting as their sort of number one out-and-out right-wing target.
The way I look at it, and you've already said it there, Newcastle have this list of targets who they watch, scout, go in for. If they don't get it done in the first kind of transfer window, they've watched and they'll go in again and again until that deal becomes totally undoable. And you look back on the transfer windows that they've had under the current ownership, they've got very little wrong, if anything at all, when it comes to incoming. So you've got to trust that Steve Nixon and the scouting staff have done their homework. And there's a reason why they'll be going back in for Elanga, because of his attributes, because of his attitude, because of what he can do. And I think they've earned the right to be trusted on this. They're not just going to go in on a whim, which is really good. We don't want that. We want them to be proper meticulous in buying these players, especially for this amount of money as well. But you are correct. It hasn't gone down well with everybody. I mean, the first comment that literally dropped on the screen here as we went live was from Philip, who said he's bang average. We need proven winners and a world-class forward to progress to win, not Manchester United rejects. We've got someone else saying 60 million for the Swedish Orbitan, which I think is a little bit harsh. We've got Jason, I would love Elanga to play with Isaac on Tyne's side. I mean, it is not universally hatred for Elanga, and that might be a bit of a strong word, but it is certainly not a move that has gone down well. Some people don't see him as that real upgrade, but I think it's more to do with the price tag, isn't it? But if you look at his numbers, 14 goals, 23 assists in 113 games, I think that's a good building block. I think it's a good foundation to build upon. What have you made about, though, Aaron, the fear that Elanga doesn't quite fit into Newcastle's system, especially when it comes to that low block?
There's lots of people who as you say rightly, are maybe a little bit concerned about the price, but then the second criticism you probably hear more than any most is that, is he a player who needs to be in a counter-attacking team? We saw it against Newcastle United on Boxing Day a while ago when Nottingham Forest came to St James Park and tore them apart. Anthony Elanga was absolutely incredible on the counter-attack. He very much is a pacey player who probably needs, the ball in transition. But look, Eddie Howe, I've got no doubt if he was to sign Anthony Elanga, would turn him into a fantastic player. I think, as we've already mentioned, at 23, there's room and time to mould him. So yes, there would maybe be concerns, but I think you trust Eddie Howe will get the best out of him.
It's funny, isn't it? Because with Paul Mitchell going, a lot of people said, and this isn't necessarily my opinion or Aaron's opinion, but a lot of people said Eddie Howe has won that power battle. I mean, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, really. We don't know. There has been a power struggle, but a lot of people said Eddie Howe has won that battle. A week later, and they've gone in for Elanga, and all of a sudden, you kind of trust the decision going in for Elanga. I just find it amusing that the same people celebrating this so-called power battle victory for Eddie Howe are now criticising Eddie Howe potentially putting Elanga top of the list.
Yeah, and in a little bit of a way, this whole saga and the chase for Elanga sort of reminds me a little bit of around Anthony Gordon when he signed. There was a lot of people who were probably not too far from what we're seeing in the messages here, saying, well, he's bang average. Obviously people saying here 50 million seems steep on Elanga. People were definitely saying 40, 45 million was steep for Anthony Gordon. And we're 2-3 years down the track, and it's a totally different story. So again, I think, just like I was saying last week, I think there needs to be calm on the general front about Newcastle signing players. I think if Newcastle sign a player like Anthony Elanga, I think there should be a period of, okay, let's see what he can do under Eddie Howe.
Most certainly. So, well, I'll read through some of the comments now on Twitter. I know you've got them up on there as well. So, I don't read out, Aaron, you can jump in. But we've got Matt saying, I like Elanga. I think it'd be a good signing. May please Isaac, but 50 million seems steep. My reservation would be whether we need a left-footed right winger, given Murphy is right-footed, and Isaac and Gordon also offer the pace. If Marawaki was 10 million pounds more or cheaper, his numbers seem better. We've got Arnie saying he's an improvement on what we have. Banksy says I would welcome him because he's an improvement on what we have as well. I think some people are expecting us to bring in world-class players this window financially, and for many other reasons, I don't think that is feasible. Elanga fits what we are trying to do right now. Jameson, good player, but I don't think he offers anything different to what we have already. So I spent £50 million on him. Keith says, not for me. Competition for Murphy and Eddie will make him a better player than he is now. On another note, there's another question there from Keith, which I'll read in a second. But it is overwhelmingly kind of against Elanga coming to Newcastle. But again, it seems to be more on the price point. But as I said earlier on, Forest are in a fantastic position. And I tweeted on Saturday or Sunday when this news first broke that we've had complaints about Newcastle United's players being linked to other clubs in the Premier League. Livramento, for example, Man City, and reports that they think they can get him for 78 million, 80 million pounds. And you go, what are you on about? Like, he's such an important part of Newcastle United's side. For me, you start the conversation at the very least at 120 million. And you look at me, but he's going to be the world's best right back, in my opinion, in a few years' time. The point being, when a club is in a strong position, they will demand exactly what they want. Why should they lower the price? And why should Nottingham Forest pick up the phone when Newcastle ring and they go, oh yeah, you know what, we'll let them have them for 30 million. Not at all. The other way around, we're all kicking off because Livramento goes City reportedly for 70, 80 million pounds. It's just funny to watch the same people who have a meltdown about those reports kind of say, oh, well, Forest are charging us too much. But it has definitely created a little bit of debate. The next name we're going to talk about, unless you've got a tweet you want to read out, you look like you were ready.
No, I'm just scrolling through the tweets and I'm just sort of chuckling at myself because in one breath you've got Scott here saying, I'm not convinced that he and Joao Pedro solve our issues, i.e. breaking down low blocks. Then you've got 2 minutes later, Thurgo Hulland Mag saying, he fits the way we play perfectly. Then somebody says, never looked decent against low blocks. His ball control is bad. He also has less dribbles than Murphy. And then in the next breath, someone's saying, well, he's an upgrade on what we've got in Murphy. So again, it is very, very split down the middle as to whether he'd be a fan or not.
I like him,
I like Elanga. I think he would inject some really good pace there. As I say, I think he's young enough and talented enough to be really molded into something special. As you mentioned, they could be signing him for 60 and selling him on for a profit in the next couple of years. But there's an interesting point here as well that somebody makes, and I was going to read it out before. J-Mac, in response to your question, says, there's an easy answer. Everybody had Brian and Burmo from Brentford in their heads as a done deal, so Anthony Elanga instantly feels like a letdown. I would love to see him at Newcastle. The more pace injected in the team, the better. And I think that's a good point, isn't it?
Yeah, certainly so. I think he would be a tremendous signing. The pace is key for me, but he's also quite versatile as well. He can play on both flanks. I think, like I say, he's got a decent footing for Newcastle to build upon with his stats. And his best yards are ahead of him. He's definitely got more levels to go. So for me, it would be a great signing. Yes, the price tag, I can understand the frustrations, but this is just the world of football. This is just how much players cost these days. It is frustrating, but if you want to be successful, you probably have to just, bite the bullet and pay the money. Joao Pedro at Brighton is the other man we're going to talk about. Stepped up the interest. What are you laughing at now?
No, I'm just go on, carry on.
No, come on.
No, I'm just thinking to myself, if we're having a debate about Anthony Elanga, I feel like in my own head I'm even more conflicted about Pedro than I am Elanga, to be fair.
Yeah, I'm not on board with this move,
really?
if I'm being totally honest. No, doesn't do for me. I think the numbers are decent enough, but it's his. I've got concerns over his discipline and temperament. I think he's a very talented player, but again, you say trust Steve Nixon and the scouting staff, and Steve Nixon, of course, did like him before he joined Brighton. Numbers, as I say, are great. I think 30 goals in 70 games in all competitions isn't a bad record at all. The one question, though, burning question I have is why are Brighton believed to be open to letting him go? When Brighton are building a team and have really achieved something last season, they're very, very close to getting to Europe, why are they letting one of their key men go when Danny Welbeck, 12 months left on his contract, Ferguson's just fallen off the wagon completely. I know they've gone out and confirmed this 18-year-old Greek lad for 40-odd million pounds, but I don't get it. It could only be, in my head, maybe something to do with PSR potentially, but then you can't go and spend 40 million on someone and have financial worries, right?
No, Brighton are probably one of the most well-run clubs in the Premier League, and I mean they're posting profit every year. It's not going to be PSR related. I think from people I've spoke to, I mean this is the Brighton model, isn't it? They sign players like Leandro Trossard, Alexis McAllister, Moises Caicedo, Yves Bissouma, all these players, and every single one of them ends up leaving after 2 or 3 years for huge profit. Now, if Brighton are sitting here with an offer of 60+ million from Newcastle, then they've doubled their money in less than 2 years?
But it's different this time, is it not?
Is it?
Yeah, because they were on the cusp of European football. I feel like when those players that you've mentioned there were sold, they still had the kind of accolades of maybe everyone's second favourite team because of the way they play and the way the clubs win. But where were they in the league?
But they'd already reached Europe,
of course, under De Zerbi. But I think for me, it just feels a bit of a strange move. Like, I think those players you mentioned, you always accepted they were going to move on. It would just, the cycle would just repeat. But I think they were at a crossroads where if you're a Brighton fan and the Brighton manager, you go, we're there. We could actually build something here properly and really put the foundations in for a solid, top 6, top 7 side. I think if you continue to sell your best players like they do, you're never going to break into that top 6 because you always have to restart and go again. So,
but that's not to say that's not what they're doing. Though I get that that's your point of they shouldn't be selling these players, but all I'm saying is this is the Brighton model, isn't it?
I get that.
So
I get that.
Is my reason. I mean, when Joao Pedro was first linked with Newcastle again, I sort of went back and listened to the manager Fabian Herzler talking about Joao Pedro at the end of the season. Now, you've obviously mentioned his temperament issues and potentially some hot-headedness. He obviously missed the last 2 games of Brighton's Premier League campaign because he had an altercation with Van Heck in training. He was left out of the squad for those reasons. But listening to Fabian Herzler, he was very much, and unless he's just a very good bluffer, I thought he was a manager who was speaking as if he would be managing Joao Pedro next season. There wasn't like we're washing our hands with him. It was, very much he's going to learn from this. He's just going to have a couple of games out the team for his own sake, and then he's going to be back next season. It didn't look like a manager who was wanting the player to go because of his behaviour. Now, again, I might be wrong on that, but I think if I'm just maybe taking a step back, I think Brighton are maybe looking at it and thinking, look, we paid 30 million. We've got some fantastic, appearances and goals out of Joao Pedro in the last 2 years. As you say, they've went to Olympiacos and signed this 18-year-old from Greece who, could potentially be the next Joao Pedro. And then they're going to double the money in the process. I'm on the fence about it purely because I think 60 million is a lot of money. And let's bear in mind, you probably want to spend 50, 60 million on an unbelievable right winger as well. They want a new right-sided centre-half and they want a new goalkeeper. I mean, at the minute, we're talking about close to £200 million, which they can't spend this summer. So unless they sell somebody. So it's all just very unusual that 2 huge, names, 2 big money signings at the top end of the pitch are being linked so early in the window.
I think for me, aside from the issues with his discipline, because remember he escaped one, didn't he, where he went to elbow someone and got away with it. Yeah. Was very fortunate with that. Is that him signing would probably mean a formation change for Newcastle United, which Eddie Howe is apparently open to. It's not bad to have a plan B or C, is it? But a little bit like with the wage structure and the Brian and Burmo 250 grand a week thing, if you're going to do that, if you're going to rip at what i.e. the formation, which has worked so well over the last couple of years, do you do it for a player like Joao Pedro?
Yeah. Do you? I think, as you say, do you then really push the ball out and say, right, well, we're going to go and get Goalkeeper or Osimhen or I was going to say Delap there, but Delap's gone, and even Delap wouldn't fit that mold. But I do get what you mean. I don't know whether it will. I don't think Joao Pedro coming in would necessarily point to the fact that they're changing formation. Well, I think Joao Pedro. I know you're spending a lot of money on him, but to be a really consistent Champions League outfit, you probably need a 50, 60 million player in backup like that.
Well, that leads us on to the next question, because he does have this reputation, maybe unfairly, of being a bit of a sulky player. Is he going to be happy playing second fiddle to Alexander Isak if Eddie Howe doesn't change his formation to better him? I mean, already reports surfacing that probably will be the biggest hurdle for Newcastle United when it comes to Pedro is to persuade him to come here and play back up to Alexander Isak.
Yeah, look, it's probably the biggest hurdle that Newcastle have got to overcome this summer is trying to find somebody who will be willing to come in and play second fiddle. I mean, I wrote about it the other week, and it's just fascinating to go through what Tottenham did a couple of years ago when they had Harry Kane in a similar mold, Alexander Isak, who was just untouchable. And you think of the players they went through, Soldado, Janssen, and loads of players that came in and just could not get near him. And I think there will probably be doubts in a lot of players' minds about coming in that. So yeah, look, I can't speak for Joao Pedro. I don't know how he'd feel. He's very versatile. He can play off the left. He can play deeper. He's not just restricted to being a central striker, although he did play the vast majority of his games last season, as Brighton's furthest forward up the pitch. But I don't know. I'm more. If you'd rather say you can have one now, it would be Elanga for me all day. I'm a little bit unsure about Pedro, but again, if he was to sign, look, we know Eddie Howe has liked him for years, since 2022,
and Steve Nixon
when
as
they
well.
thought they had him in 2022, and it was pretty much a done deal. Watford managed to get him to sign a new deal, and Brighton signed him the next summer. So clearly, they really like what they see in him.
And also, to use Anthony Gordon as an example yet again, people raise concerns about his
temperament.
Exactly. Yeah. And Eddie Howe has worked his magic with him. We've also seen Eddie Howe work his magic, I think, with Bruno and Joe Linton in terms of that discipline, which is really good because, it's nice and controlled. They're not running wild, so to speak. So we know Eddie Howe has history in dampening people's concerns when it does come to discipline.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, that would be another reason why you could sort of maybe give them the benefit of the doubt if he does come in.
Some comments then live on YouTube. Thank you very much for tuning in, live on X and Facebook as well. We've got Jonas saying, anyone thinking we could buy Elanga for 60 million and sell him on for a profit is pretty clueless. Well, thank you very much, Jonas. If Forest gets 60 million for Elanga, they will laugh all the way to the bank and buy two as good players for the same money from the continent. We've got Jamie saying, based on what you've mentioned about Gordon, I thought Everton were having a pants down, and Everton fans were happy with that price too. Now looking back, it was a great bit of business. We have a few comments on Pedro. Brian saying, what has Pedro done to even attract any interest at all? Bang average at Watford and Brighton. Well, like I say, his goals record's not bad. I think it was 10 goals last season in the Premier League. I think, again, like Elanga, good footing to build on. We've got Scott saying, do you think Bakayoko from PSV would be a good option? I think he looks like a top winger. You pay more for anyone in the Premier League if they're any good, don't you think? And Bournemouth has been linked to a £20 million move for him. He was linked to Newcastle back in January and summer prior to that as well. Young man, full of pace. Should Newcastle not be looking at that?
It certainly looks like Newcastle United's interest in him has dwindled. They were obviously keen to maybe try do a deal in the winter. They obviously didn't have the funds to do it. PSV managed to persuade him to stay at the end of the season. Since then, not only have Newcastle United started looking at their targets, but actually Bakayoko really dropped out of favour at PSV. He ended up playing for the B team towards the back end of the season. So I think there's more of a risk signing someone like that, even if you're getting them for 20 million, than going out and getting a Prem player for 50 or 60.
GD says City buy Rangers and Cherky for good prices from Europe in the Premier League. They were twice the price in the Premier League. A lot of people have raised this point about the quality that City are signing from the continent. I mean, can you offer kind of any light? I mean, is it just the attraction of City and the potential of a real charge for the Premier League title next season? Is it the wages that are maybe not really thought about here? That they're paying 35 million, I think, for Render. Yeah. But yeah, what wages are you going to be on?
Yeah, look, they're obviously going to be paying substantially more than clubs in Serie A, La Liga, Bundesliga compared to one of the big attractions of the Premier League. The Premier League itself is a big pull. So undoubtedly, yes, those fees might not be as substantial. And look, you've got to think that 35 million in Spain or France goes a lot further than it does to a club receiving it in England. So, AC Milan are probably snapping their hands off something like that. Speaking of Reinders going to Man City, I look at that Milan team who absolutely were calamitous last season. Not in Europe next season at all. I look at that squad and I think you should be all over that. Newcastle have already been linked with two of their centre-backs, Tomori and Malik Thiaw. I would be looking at Rafael Leao.
He's the one.
He's the one, isn't he? I mean, if rumours are to be believed in Italy, he's available for the same price as Joao Pedro this summer, 60 million. I mean, look, I know that Newcastle United have already got two left-sided attackers who are fighting amongst themselves. But, look, I don't want this to happen. But if Harvey Barnes or Anthony Gordon were to go, he's got to be, number one. I would be looking at loads of them. I'd be looking at Pulisic as well, who you'd probably be able to get for very, very cheap. There are so many of those players in Serie A I'd be looking for, but especially clubs like Milan. And I think what's really interesting is Eddie Howe towards the back end of the season was really, really clear, uncharacteristically clear, that Newcastle United were going to go and target clubs who they could take advantage of. Now, he wasn't talking about AC Milan, but he was talking about the Villas and the PSR troubled clubs of the Premier League. So instead, now we're sat here a month on and we're talking about them trying to go and get Nottingham Forest's one of their biggest attackers. They're under no PSR issues. They've got no need to sell. So it just seems like we've sort of had this flip of what Eddie Howe said the club might do to what they're actually doing now in terms of trying to get Pedro and Elanga from clubs who don't need to sell. It's just an interest, and now it's sort of switched.
Well, who knows? In a few weeks' time, when the window reopens after tomorrow's closure, Newcastle might indeed turn their attention to the continent. Obviously, we've seen it with Bruno, we've seen it with Tonali. Those deals kind of came out of nowhere. So fingers crossed something like that may happen again, at least in terms of the quality. On to Marc Guehi then. And we know Newcastle United really like him. He's still not signed that deal. I've been told that Matt Targett could potentially hold the key. Now, we know Matt Targett is probably going to leave this summer. But interestingly, it has been said that he could move this deal along slightly because Ben Chilwell's gone back to Chelsea. So he was on loan at Palace. He was back up to Mitchell. Now they want another left back to provide that competition, but really back up to Mitchell. And you wonder, maybe that could be ideal for both Newcastle and Matt Targett. It has been suggested that Palace would not be against the idea of taking Targett as part of a cash per player deal.
Interesting.
Because he's still not signed that deal.
Yeah.
So really now is the only window where they can get a real bit of cash from him, because they're going to January and he's only got a few months left on his contract.
Speaking of clubs, can't you?
Yeah, exactly. So they're running the risk there.
They are running the risk, but how much do you pay for Marc Guehi with a year left on his deal? This is the question.
Well, interestingly, Tuesday morning, ladies and gents, the next Milner and Musgrove show will hit the airwaves, and it is all about Marc Guehi alternatives. But we do ask that question. And I said on that episode that I think if you have to pay 45, 50 million for Marc Guehi, even with a year left on his deal, I don't think it's the worst thing, because he's of a good age. You tie him down to a good contract. What would be worth if he was under contract? I know he's not. So that's what everyone will say. But look, again, Palace know there's suitors out there, not just Newcastle. They'll be hoping for a bidding war. I think they are running the risk and a gamble. But it's one of those where we're at the point where Newcastle United need to strengthen. They know who they want. We know they don't move away from a certain select pool of targets. Do they not just need to bite the bullet and just say, do you know what? If they want 40 million for him, let's just do it. Everyone will be happy with the quality of players signed. We'll have a few grumbles about the price tag, but if the numbers work for our books, they work. We've got a quality player who's going to instantly improve that side. Let's stop walking around and just... I think the frustration comes with, we don't want this saga to play out again. Last summer was the most frustrating thing, and not all of Newcastle's doing. We know Crystal Palace played them along, but we just need this to end one way or the other. If Palace want £40 million and Newcastle aren't willing to pay it, say that and walk away and go and move on to other targets.
I just think, look, I really like Marc Guehi. I think, as you say, he would massively strengthen this Newcastle United side, obviously. But I've just got a horrible feeling that even with a year left on his deal and no, as it looks like, no interest in signing a new deal, I still think Palace will try to hold him ransom. And I just think at that stage, why would you not go and look at Tomori, who is not going to cost you anywhere near 45, 50 million, or Theo, who's probably going to be available for half that, or go to the Bundesliga and look at Leverkusen and someone like Tapsoba. Any of these players on the continent would cost you less than 45 million. And yes, there's a little bit of a risk attached, but I just think 45, 50 million for Marc Guehi with a year left on his deal is...
Go on then. What are you paying then?
I think 40 at a push, and even then I would still feel a little bit sick about it. And it's not because of the quality of Marc Guehi. He's a fantastic player, but Newcastle United could have him for free in a year's time, or on significantly less in January. I don't know. Look, again, we don't know. We don't know what Palace view. Palace obviously still want to keep him. There's been no indication one way or another whether he's going to go or not.
Well, interestingly, they're in for Diamane of Sporting.
Yeah, linked with Newcastle a lot, him.
And again, I've been told that is done with the inevitability that Guehi will leave this summer. So interesting. We've got a few people in the comments talking about price tags. David says Andrew is sounding desperate, £30 million max. Whereas Gary agrees with Ian, who says he would pay £40 million for Guehi. And there was another one in the comments. I'm sorry, I've lost you. He said 45 million. It was from Dominic, who says 45 million at most. And we've got another one here said, we're not bat an eyelid at 50 million for Guehi. He's a top class centre back, and we are crying out for pace. So a little bit split, which is always good.
It's just the theme of this podcast today, just transfer targets that are splitting people down the middle.
Exactly. It creates the debate. That's what we're after. We have some questions that have been sent in. So thank you very much for sending those in. Do email us at theeibwpodcast@reachplc.com. And Thomas has written in, and he says, thanks for the content, guys, keeping us going through the summer. Do you think Newcastle aren't making any moves in the market due to PSR, and that come July the 1st, we might see them spend?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was thinking about this morning, and I think, again, that's sort of why I keep coming on this podcast and saying there's no need to panic, and it's still a very long summer. We know that obviously when the new sort of rolling PSR 3-year window comes along, obviously Newcastle fans are already going to be looking rosy later in the summer, and obviously moves the burden of those finances onto the next financial year. So yes, but then also you've sort of got, again, very public comments from Eddie Howe talking about speed and wanting to get things done. We've obviously just been talking off air about Manchester United, Chelsea, Liverpool, Arsenal all getting deals done. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if early July is when they start to really strike.
I wonder if we'll see some movement in the last week of June when it becomes apparent which clubs really need to sell players, as we saw last year for Newcastle United, when obviously they sold Elliot Anderson and Nico Minter, and that was just an absolute whirlwind, wasn't it, over those days that played out. So I wonder whether we will see maybe Aston Villa
are the team to watch. I think they could be gutted at the end of this month.
They gambled heavily on Rashford.
Yeah.
And the chap from PSG, and it backfired hugely. Now they will be paying the price for that. But at the other end, I mean, you've just got to laugh at Chelsea, haven't you? I mean, it's just absolutely remarkable. And we haven't actually spoken about on the podcast the fact that the Premier League tried to shut that loophole a couple of weeks ago. Now, the Premier League get a lot of stick for a lot of the rules, and I think quite understandably and quite rightly in certain quarters that they allow certain things to happen and they don't look very strong. But on this, they tried to shut that down, and they did not get enough votes from Premier League clubs. So you can't put that on Richard Masters or any of the Premier League board. That is down to the clubs. What do you make of that?
Yeah, look, it's frustrating because for me, I don't know, it just makes a bit of a mockery of, I mean, the full transfer situation, the spending situation in the league is just so playing wrong. I mean, when you've got club, we haven't even spoke about Manchester United and the debt that they're in and the cuts and the savings they're making, and yet they can go out and sign like someone like Brian Mbeumo after signing Matheus Cunha. Chelsea, as we all know, again, I don't want to be seeing clubs selling women's team themselves or hotels themselves. It just makes a total mockery again when you've got clubs like Newcastle playing by the rules. But yeah, look, it's a transfer window, and that means Chelsea are going to do what Chelsea do.
I mean, literally every player we've talked about,
Chelsea have been linked. I think the funniest thing is that obviously Chelsea, apparently linked with Joao Pedro. They also want the big one that's been in the news last couple of days.
They like Marc Guehi.
They're like a lot of players, but especially attacking players. Now, bearing in mind they've only got Cole Palmer and Nicholas Jackson and Liam Delap, Pedro Neto and Raheem Sterling and Andres Santos, who's going to be coming back from his loan at Strasbourg, and they've also got Madueke.
Or Ekitike
they want. They've also got that youngster George. They've got
still got Broja on the books.
Broja still on the books. I mean, those are just the attackers we can name off the top of our head. There's probably will be loads that I've missed. So yeah, the fact that they're in for, I mean, penny for Liam Delap's thoughts, by the way. If they sign Hugo Ekitike after they've essentially surely promised him that he's going to be first choice or at least get some game time.
You like the project, Delap. That's what he liked. He liked the project. Thank you there to Thomas for emailing in. Paul says, we have known Newcastle have been subject to the tax ever since the takeover. that won't change. Do the board just have to accept this to strengthen the squad?
I don't know if it's a case of just accepting it. Look, as you say, I think Eddie Howe will be well aware now. He's came out on the record plenty of times and said, look, as Newcastle, we know we don't have any friends in this game. We don't have friends in the loan market. We don't have any clubs in the Premier League wanting to help us, which again sort of leaves me scratching my head as to why we haven't maybe heard more interest in players on the continent. But I don't think it's something they have to accept. I think it's something they'll be trying to work around. They'll be trying to get the prices down. They'll be trying to get this tax reduced somehow. Whether they can do it or not, we'll have to see.
Dominic says, why aren't Newcastle United or why are Newcastle United playing by the rules when it comes to PSR? So in terms of what we've discussed there with Chelsea in the hotel or selling the women's side, which, by the way, isn't breaking the rules. It's not breaking the rules. We have to make that clear. It doesn't sit very well with you, but they haven't done anything wrong. Why aren't Newcastle United doing that? Is it a case that maybe in the back of their heads they're thinking, as soon as we do this, things will then change? Those clubs who decided to vote against the change for those rules after Chelsea sold their women's side will all of a sudden decide, actually, we want to vote for them. Do you think that's what it comes down to? Or because people have asked, why don't the sell Newcastle women's side to someone, a third party, to raise the cash? I suppose a little bit different because Chelsea's women's side have won nearly everything under the sun.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Look, I can't speak for what other Premier League clubs would do. You do obviously have to remember what they did with the APT rules as soon as Newcastle's takeover went over, and that was a very sort of flagrant message to Newcastle that they were going to try and clamp down. But then again, I think about trying to put myself in Eddie Howe's shoes, and I probably think there's a point of not wanting to break the rules. I don't think he or high-ranking members of the club will want Newcastle to be tarnished like that.
You want to do it kind of pure when you win a title.
And again, maybe I'm just being too sentimental, but do I really want Newcastle to win everything but break the rules in the process? I don't know.
Bend the rules, just in case someone from Chelsea is watching. Bend the rules.
But I suspect there'll probably be 85 or 95% of the people in our comments listen to this and would say, by hook or by crook, just sign players no matter what it takes. If you've got to bend the rules, bend the rules.
That's it. If Chelsea win the Premier League title next season, you want to go down to the parade and ask them if they're bothered about selling their women's side?
Exactly.
I doubt many would say give the medals back. Thank you for that comment there from Dominic. Sam has emailed in and says, with John Ruddy potentially signing a new deal, can you explain what is going on with the goalkeeping department? Surely they can't sign another one.
They can. I suspect, look, the thing with John Ruddy is, for starters, Eddie Howe absolutely loves him. There was a reason he brought him in when he got released from Birmingham City when they got relegated, and that was because very, very experienced at 38 years of age. Great mentor, great presence in the dressing room, fantastic on the training pitch. We know this is the Eddie Howe playbook. It's why Marc Guehi stayed around for so long. Essentially, it's probably why Martin Dubravka stayed for so long as well, in a slightly different manner. I think they can sign a new goalkeeper because I feel there is absolutely no way Odysseus Fakadimos stays. And as we've talked about on the pod as well, I'd be a little bit surprised if Martin Dubravka stays as well. I think now is probably the time to revamp that goalkeeping department a little bit. I think you probably keep Nick Pope unless a huge offer comes in. I think, in an ideal world, it's someone like Trafford or a young goalkeeper who can learn from him. Ruddy stays, Gillespie's obviously staying, he's signed a new deal. And then maybe Dubravka, there's your 5. I think you can sign a new goalkeeper because, again, for me, I think I'll be really, really shocked if Fakadimos is still here beyond the summer.
Noah says, bring Trafford in, love him. Pope alternative for a year till Trafford is ready to take the baton. I don't agree with getting rid of Pope for Trafford just yet. Thoughts on that? Because Trafford's not going to come in and sit on the bench, is he? Do you think he will?
For a year, maybe, potentially. I mean, look, he's joining a Champions League club. He's not at Burnley where he can maybe have the right to be first choice. But also, if James Trafford was to sign, listening to James Trafford speak, I think he would very much be coming in saying, I'm taking Nick Pope's spot. He talks about himself very, very positively. He calls himself world class. He's not short of confidence. He's on the back of one of the best seasons ever in the Championship. Newcastle played in 4 competitions. He's going to get chances next season if he joins. But again, I mean, look, we're talking about James Trafford. He's going to cost you 30 plus 35 million now. We're talking about potentially Marc Guehi. We're talking about 40, 50 million. And then we've just spent the first half an hour talking about 260 million podcasts. 260 million strikers, sorry. That is 200 million. It's just not feasible.
Yeah,
it's where they cut the corners, so to speak.
Interesting. That takes us to the Callum Wilson point, which we'll get into in a moment. But on James Trafford, obviously goes on Ben Foster's podcast and he talks about last summer and wanting this move. I mean, I sat there and I listened to it and I thought, what on earth is he doing? Like, fair play, you've been really open, but like, you're talking about this. He hasn't just said that to talk about. I think there's a reason behind it. Is he trying to reignite the interest, or for me, I just felt it was a little bit of a.
But what's the issue with him talking about it though? Why is he not allowed to talk about it?
I don't know. If I was a Burnley fan, I'd be a little bit put out by that. Like, he really wanted to go.
But if I was a Burnley fan, I'd be. Would you not be thinking like Brian Mbeumo last summer when he came out and said he wanted to go before? I mean, he was talking about he wanted to go now, but he wasn't talking about a year before. I would be looking at James Trafford and saying, well, he wanted to go and he's still conceded 16 goals in the league last
I'm
season.
just maybe a little bit more sceptical. And if I was a Burnley fan, I'm thinking he's definitely trying to...
Look, I think the less robots we've got in football, the better. And if James Trafford wants to be open rather than saying, oh, well, yeah.
Hey, if it leads to a Newcastle United move,
Burnley, exactly.
All for it. Callum Wilson then. We talk about there the money that Newcastle United potentially want to spend, would have to spend if they want those 3 players in. 120, 150 million at least for Trafford, Pedro, and Elanga. I think that is a reason Newcastle have offered or talking to Callum Wilson about a new deal, because they know that they need to make these numbers work. And how easy is it going to be to find a little bit extra cash to bring in someone who's happy to be third choice? And if it can be called upon if fit, and we know that's a big if, can actually do a job.
Yeah, look, I think the thing with Callum Wilson is you've got to remember, Newcastle really, really struggled last time in the Champions League because they didn't have that depth. And I think to be getting rid of players like that, I know, we can talk all day about the injury record and how consistent he is or how, safe he is as an option. But they need bodies in that squad. And I think that the thing with Callum Wilson is, he knows the club. Eddie Howe loves him and trusts him when he's fit. And the only real question mark for me is about the money, because he's obviously on a very big contract at Newcastle, which rightly so, because when he signed it, he was one of the main men. It's whether he is going to be happy taking such a huge hit, because it will be huge, because as you say, he's probably going to drop to third choice next season.
But interestingly, I mean, I'm sure I don't know if he knew this was coming, but when he went on, what's his name? Jake Humphrey's podcast, the High Performance Podcast, and he said, I'm comfortable now. Financially, thankfully, I'm stable. So that's not an issue.
I mean, that's all well and good saying that while he's still on the contract that he's on. But I tell you what, he probably got a shock when he got that first offer in. And they were...
For me, now we don't know what he's on. We don't know what he gets paid weekly, but I imagine it's close to 100 grand than it is to 50. I think you have to... It has to be on a 50 for me, like as in the new deal, and then there's bonuses on top of that. And I think they have to be. I mean, how sure must they be that he is going to be able to be picked for the majority of games next season? Because that's my biggest concern. He signs, they need to be as close as to 100% of that they can be, that he's going to be available to be picked. Never mind start, just to be available. I mean, they must see something that obviously they've got the access to the medical records, but they must be certain, right?
Can you be certain with Callum Wilson?
But it's a huge gamble, if not.
Yeah, look at it. It is, but at the same time, I've got no issue with Callum Wilson signing a new deal if they bring in another striker.
Because we've got someone saying here, Wilson does nothing. Truls here says Wilson does nothing. Why keep a player that will hold us back? It makes no sense in their opinion. Interesting, isn't it? But look, if he's overcome the injuries that have plagued him for the last couple of seasons, he knows he won't play many games at all, and he only has to, start, say, 4 or 5, then you go, fair enough. But of course, football isn't like that, is it? They could go out and sign this second strike, go and sign Pedro, and he gets injured and misses the entirety of the season. And then we're back to what we saw for the majority of this season, where you go, yeah, Isak's got no one to push him, and that would be an issue. So I think it is a huge gamble, but again, you trust those making those calls, don't you?
100%.
Well, ladies and gents, thank you very much for tuning in. Oh, do you know what? Actually, finish off just quickly on the Livramento to City stuff, because it's not happening, right?
No, I mean, Newcastle are absolutely, what's the word? I mean, they are just totally consistent with their stance, and that is that he's not for sale. And I think the only thing that would change that is Livramento coming to them and saying, look, I want to go, or an offer which was just mind-bogglingly stupid, which I don't think will come.
I liken it to the nice house at the end of my street that I really want to buy, but they don't want to sell, and I ain't got the money.
There you go.
That's exactly what it's like.
I mean, Manchester City probably
Might have the money to buy the house.
If any club in the world has the money, it's probably Manchester City. But yeah, look, I'm not too worried about Jane Livramento. As I say, Newcastle really, really don't want to lose him.
But how refreshing, is it to be sitting here and you see those links, and you know that actually Newcastle are in a really strong position because of Champions League football. Hopefully, they're going to add some quality players this summer. Whereas you think back to Mike Ashley, you think as soon as a big player was linked to a big team, you go, yeah, they're going to go. But also, they weren't the best sellers back then.
I don't even think you need to go back to Mike Ashley. I think you need to go back to 12 months' time when Newcastle had just missed out on European football and had all those PSR concerns, and we spent the full summer talking about Bruno and Gordon and Isak being linked away. And this summer, it's well, everything's in their favour. They've got no financial concerns. Well, they don't have as many financial concerns as they did. They're not in a position where they need to sell, and they've got Champions League football to look forward to and to offer new players.
Dominic says, if they doubled what we paid for him, hard argue if we reinvest it.
I think you are absolutely mental to suggest that 120 million is the valuation of Tilo Livramento.
Be strong.
I think if somebody came in with 85 million, I think you're saying
not at all. Like, this is the time to prove that if you're gonna sell one of your big stars, this is the time to prove that you're going to be the very best of sellers. And I think the way that you scare people off is by, standing strong and saying, if you want to buy our best players, you're going to have to pay the big bucks. We talk about a Newcastle tax, then apply it to City. If they want to sign Tino Livramento, then don't even bother ringing unless you can offer 120 million, and then we still might not even pick up the phone, because he is one of the best right backs in the Premier League at the moment, one of the best left backs in the Premier League. He continues on this development. He's going to be the best fullback in European football, I think, in a few years to come.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I'd love to know the listeners' thoughts on that as well. So definitely email in or mention us on Twitter as to what you'd be considering for Livramento. But look, the word from Newcastle is he's not for sale.
Love that. Right, ladies and gents, thank you very much for tuning in. Do remember to hit like, subscribe on YouTube. Leave us a rating and review on the audio-only platform. Do click the link in the podcast description box to get your discount offer on your eSIM provided by Saley. It's been a pleasure as always. And for myself and Aaron, we will see you guys next week.